In Australia, over 40,000 men and women are currently behind bars. They've shattered countless lives, destroyed families. Some have been responsible for unspeakable violence.
There are just some people that are just evil of heart.
She's just scary. She's just real scary.
Some people are born with just that evil, Jane.
If you think you've seen and heard it all, you haven't. The truth of life behind bars in some of Australia's highest security prisons, told by the people who know.
It's dangerous on a daily basis. It's life-threatening.
Stabbings, hangings, people getting their heads stomped on.
If I was dangerous when I went in, I was more dangerous when I came out.
My broken life, a shadow of my past. My time is not enough.
In this episode,
He skipped bail.
Tony Mockbell, the country's most infamous drug dealer, goes on the run.
It became sort of a criminal Where's Wally?
I have committed terrorist acts in Australia.
And the girlfriend of Lint Cafe siege killer Man Monis murders his wife.
And Amira Drutas stabbed her 18 times.
Plus, the most daring prison escape ever in Australia.
There's only one way that we can get out. You've got to hijack a helicopter.
But first,
Hey, please come! Someone has shot my parents. I think they're all bleeding. They're on the floor. They're not breathing. What do I do? It's my mama.
this 000 call was recorded on July the 10th, 2001. Seth Gonzalez has just found his parents and sister brutally stabbed multiple times in their family home. But not all is as it seems. Seth Gonzalez knows exactly what has happened to his family because he is the one who's killed them. Ultimately, prosecutors will prove Gonzalez murdered his family to try and inherit their fortune. And for these horrific crimes, he will be found guilty and receive 3 life sentences. He's currently incarcerated at Lithgow Correctional Centre, a maximum security prison in New South Wales that holds around 400 inmates.
He's such an evil little prick.
This is former policeman and crime author Duncan McNabb.
Life in prison for someone like Seth Gonzalez will be mundane and boring. It's very much routine-driven. Seth Gonzalez would be working in the prison system. The lucky ones are perhaps in the library. The less lucky ones are cleaning toilets.
Gonzalez does anything he can to break the tedium of prison life.
He's become very fit. He's buffed up quite nicely. He's got a bit of a legal background he can play up. That'll appeal to a lot of prisoners. He can be giving advice.
And it's this legal background that indirectly becomes the main reason Gonzalez kills his family.
Seth was a law student working part-time with his father, who was an immigration lawyer.
But Gonzalez is failing university. His sister Claudine has found out he's been lying about his exam results and has told their parents. Teddy and Mary threaten to take away their son's allowance and his beloved car. Gonzalez is furious.
Seth's decided to kill his family because all he wanted was money, power, ego. What he is just a cold-blooded killer. July 10, 2001 is the day Seth put his plans into action.
Late afternoon, Gonzalez has an argument with his parents at the family law practice. He drives home, angry, around 4 p.m. His sister, Claudine, is upstairs studying.
He attacks her with a baseball bat. Having beaten her around the head, he tries to strangle her. That doesn't quite work either, so he attacks her with a knife. and she dies. Horribly and slowly.
It's now around 4:30.
He's lying in wait for his mother to come back from the family law practice.
Mary arrives home at 5:30.
His mother walks through the door and he attacks her immediately. And he attacks her with a knife because he's learning from his experience from this gruesome attack that baseball bat, probably not that effective, slow, strangulation, forget it. Knife, fast, effective, brutal. And then he waits even more for the father to come home.
It's now 7 o'clock.
His father walks through the front door innocently, and he sets upon him immediately. His father had his spinal cord severed. Such was the brutality and ferocity of the attack. The last face they saw before they died was their homicidal son, which is just utterly appalling.
Gonzalez now sets about making the murders look like a racist home invasion gone wrong. He daubs offensive graffiti on a wall.
Fuck off Asians, KKK.
Gonzalez removes the fly screen from the kitchen window and scatters the contents of Teddy's briefcase and Mary's purse around their bodies.
Seth has then gone out to dinner with a mate. The mate doesn't detect anything wrong. Seth has just killed 3 family members and he calmly goes about a social occasion in the city. He comes home about 11:30. He calls 000.
Please come!
Obviously, fakes being agitated. And shortly after that, the police arrive, the ambulances arrive, and it suddenly becomes a murder scene.
Tonight, family tragedy. A couple and daughter murdered in their Sydney home.
The first thing you do as a copper is that you stand back, take a deep breath, and look around. While Seth's excuse was intruders had got into the house and had murdered everybody. It was obvious that the 3 people had been murdered over a space of hours. Now, if you're going to be committing a robbery or a racist attack, for example, you're not going to hang around the crime scene for 3 hours.
A few days after the murders, Gonzalez goes back to his family home with police to reenact what happened when he found Claudine in her bedroom.
But there was definitely blood coming from that area. And somehow I assumed in my head that her heart's still beating somehow.
But when they've been dead quite a long time, blood doesn't gush out of a dead body. The terminology's wrong. Seth's story doesn't work.
But while police are now more than suspicious, Gonzalez makes an emotional appeal to the public to help catch his parents' killer.
Please help us and provide any information that could possibly help.
He then plays a very public role as this grieving, absolutely grief-stricken young man. He goes to the funerals. He sings at the funerals.
Papa, Mama.
Seth becomes the centre of attention.
Be there.
And that would probably play to his ego. He was enjoying the show.
Sorry.
But as Gonzalez revels in the media's attention, the cops discover something chilling. These killings weren't the first time he'd tried to murder his family.
When police later interrogated his computer, they found that he'd been searching toxic plants on the internet, and he'd got hold of some toxic plant seeds, which he'd popped into food.
Gonzalez had been trying to poison his family. Coming up on Australia's most dangerous prisoners, Gonzalez lies to police get bigger and more desperate.
He paid her to say that he was at the brothel at the time the murders were happening.
Seth Gonzalez has savagely stabbed his mum, dad, and younger sister to death in the family's Sydney home. But police now have evidence that he first tried to murder his mother Mary the week before by poisoning her.
He'd got hold of some toxic plant seeds, which he'd popped into food. His mother was actually hospitalised for a couple of days. So Seth had been planning the murder of his parents for quite some time.
Just a few weeks after killing his family, Gonzalez is speculating about how much money he will come into and how he will spend it.
He moves to a penthouse in Chatswood, and on the internet searches, he's thumbing through, shall I buy a Porsche? Shall I buy a new Lexus? So the grief didn't last terribly long.
None of this goes unnoticed by police, who are quickly unpicking Gonzalez's intruder story piece by piece.
Is it a home invasion to steal something? They haven't stolen anything. Is it a racially motivated attack? They've looked at that. They've then looked at his handwriting and think, well, hang on, the handwriting on the wall looks not dissimilar to the stuff we've found in the house that Seth has written.
Police also find a tiny speck of blue paint on his clothes and match it to the paint on the wall.
Everything he's done at the crime scene has pointed the finger back at him rather than to distract police.
But Gonzalez's alibi truly goes out the window when his Aunt Emily Luna tells cops she'd called at the family home on the night of the murders.
She knocks on the front door. No one answers. She goes off, but she remembers seeing Seth's car in the driveway. This is about 6 o'clock.
Gonzalez now changes his story. First, he says he'd called in home around 6 p.m, but didn't get out of the car, and that's why his aunt saw it there, before he drove off to have dinner with his friend. Then later, he tells cops he actually took a cab to visit a prostitute before he drove to have dinner.
He paid her to say that he was at the brothel at the time the murders were happening. He also paid a cab driver to say he dropped him at a brothel as well. I don't think it ever dawned on him the fact that the police were aware that the murders had taken place over 3 hours rather than a short space of a visit to a brothel. So he's contradicting himself. His lies aren't working.
It's now 11 months after Gonzalez has slaughtered his parents. For almost a year, police have been working tirelessly on the case to have enough evidence to charge Gonzalez with the murders of his family.
As you're well aware, you've been a suspect in relation to the murders of your mother, father and sister for some time now.
Yes.
I want to inform you now that you are formally under arrest.
Seth pleaded not guilty at the trial. The evidence against him was massive. He was convicted quite swiftly by the jury.
Handing down 3 life sentences, Justice Bruce James said Gonzalez had killed them to obtain his parents' wealth without delay and as their sole heir.
Seth doesn't have any indication of parole. He's going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
His home at Lithgow Correctional Centre is a maximum security prison for some of the worst in the country. Seth's fellow inmates include serial murderers, major drug dealers, and rapists. A far cry from the life he was dreaming of.
He was a sweeper there. He was a guy that gave out meals and did chores and whatnot, cleaned the place.
John Killick is a former criminal who spent time in prison with Gonzalez.
He came straight over to me and said, "Oh, John, hi, and I'm Seth Gonzalez, and look, what do you want? I'll give you this, that, I've got extra there." I said, "Oh, thank you."
Every step of your day is choreographed and watched by a prison officer, either physically or on CCTV. They have dinner in their cells and they watch a bit of television if they've got TV. And then lights out around about 9:30. And lights back on next morning around about dawn. And up again to do exactly the same thing day in, day out.
Despite a lot of time to think about his crimes, Gonzalez shows no remorse for what he did.
This ongoing refusal to accept his crimes, refusal to show any sign of remorse, and this constant saying, I'm innocent, it's all part of his shtick. I don't think he believes it, but it's the show he's taking to the world. Seth will be taking his secret to his grave, and he'll be denying everything until he's a very, very, very old man. Whether it's walking out the front door,
7 News can reveal an inmate strolled right through the front gate.
Or digging a good old-fashioned tunnel.
The hull was found hidden under a cabinet during a search of the furniture workshop.
Escapes from prison are more than just the stuff of movies.
He had a range of bed sheets that he tied together and was able to swing them over the wall.
In the 90s, an average of 130 prisoners broke out each year in New South Wales alone.
People call me a great escape artist.
This is ex-con John Killick, whose escape from Sydney's Silverwater jail in 1999 was, well, like something out of a movie.
You know, I said, there's only one way that we can get out. She said, what's that? And I said, you've got to hijack a helicopter. She said, brilliant.
The woman John's talking about is his then Russian girlfriend, Lucy Dudko.
So she did a trial run. So we knew enough to be able to pull it off.
So on March 25th, 1999, John uses the prison phone to call Lucy.
So I got onto her and I said, look, I'm going out for a run in the Oval. So she went ahead and hired the chopper.
Once Lucy and the pilot are in the air, she doesn't mess around.
And she said, oh, look, it's that a prison over there. She pulled out what's called an assassin's gun.
What did she actually say to you?
This is a hijack.
He thought it was a toy. So he was thinking about knocking that out of her hand. She picked up the vibes and she pulled the submachine gun out and it changed his mind.
What happens next is straight out of a Hollywood script.
She saw me. He flew down, hovered about that far off the ground. I jumped on. She handed me the submachine gun. I sat on it and swung around like that, and they all died to the ground. And the tower guy fired 3 shots at us. As I got in, I heard it go. Well, they hit us 3 times. They didn't bring us down. We were very lucky. So we got away.
But John doesn't get his Hollywood ending.
After 6 weeks on the run, it was all over. Killick got 15 years. Dudko was finally released in 2006.
Today, John and Lucy are no longer together.
That was it. That was the end of the section for us. But that's what happened. That's how it happened.
Coming up, Tony Mockbell, one of the country's most charming yet ruthless gangsters.
A drug dealer who arranges murders.
Goes on the run from police.
Became sort of a criminal Where's Wally.
This is arguably the most famous wig in Australian criminal history. And its wearer is one of the country's most infamous drug dealers, Tony Mockbell. Mockbell's name might be familiar to you because of his association with gangland boss Carl Williams. Williams waged war on rival crime gangs across Melbourne 25 years ago, and Mockbell was firmly on the side of this fellow gangster. Before Mockbell's eventual downfall and arrest, he was very, very good at dealing drugs.
3 kilograms of the drugs were concealed in statues and candles.
So much so, he had assets worth around $55 million. Money that would buy him protection and power once he went to prison. In 2012, he was sentenced to 30 years for his role in running his drug syndicate known as The Company, later reduced on appeal to 26 years in 2023. Today, Mockbell is in Barwon Prison, a high-risk maximum security facility in Victoria that holds nearly 500 prisoners.
Tony's a nice guy.
Ash Langsworth is a former correctional officer who had dealings with Mockbell in Barwon Prison.
Back then, the conditions were extremely tough for Tony. Really restricted on phone calls, visits, meals.
Tony Mockbell, I always thought it was James Cagney or someone, one of the old gangsters.
Paul O'Sullivan is another former correctional officer.
If you're going to be a criminal, be a good one, and you can't say he wasn't a good one. You always had one of the hardest blokes in the unit, with him at all times. Like he always had a bodyguard with him. The money, the power. Tony knew he was in charge.
Mockbell may be seen by some as a successful criminal, but his drug empire undoubtedly wrecked countless lives and families. But that said, Mockbell wasn't your everyday hard man. He was different.
Tony Mockbell is regarded as one of the easy-to-meet crooks of that era.
That's author Andrew Rule, who co-wrote the Underbelly series of books with one specifically about Mockbell. And he reckons it's Mockbell's humble beginnings as a pizza shop owner that made him a uniquely charming kind of gangster.
He was always comfortable with meeting strangers. He was affable. He was mine host. He had that sort of retailer's knack of being friendly to people. He was a gambler by instinct, and he needed money to gamble, and that led him into drugs. He rapidly made so much money that people worked out that he would have to sell 5,000 pizzas a day, which he clearly wasn't.
By the late 90s, Mockbell needed a way to clean his dirty drug money. And so, he's running the Tracksuit Gang, a criminal outfit that did the rounds at the Melbourne horse racing track.
They didn't mind spending 100,000 in a day and going home with 80, because it'd be 80 of bookmakers' money, which was their way of laundering dough. Once he got a lot of money, he would spend it lavishly, and that endeared him to a lot of people. He was always trying to have police, lawyers, possibly politicians on side, because that is their insurance policy, and they rely on that to keep them one step ahead of the Lord.
But the law did catch up with Mockbell in 2001.
He's arrested on a pretty big cocaine importation charge. He's bailed in 2002. I'm not saying he shouldn't have got bail, but it's interesting that he was able to get it.
Once out of prison, Mockbell goes straight back to dealing.
He formed something that they called the Company, and he and others were importing large amounts of drugs.
By 2005, MDMA, otherwise known as ecstasy, is one of Mockbell's drugs of choice. But he unwittingly buys chemicals to make the drug from an undercover cop as part of an AFP surveillance sting, and he's arrested.
He was charged and he was bailed again in 2006.
By this point, Mockbell has been charged with drug offences twice and released on bail twice.
But while he's on bail in early 2006, he receives information that he is likely to be arrested for 2 of the gangland murders.
In the Melbourne gangland wars, Mockbell's allegiance is to Carl Williams and his family. Tony Mockbell was accused and acquitted of organising the murder of Lewis Moran, part of another infamous crime family, the Morans. But hanging over his head was another murder charge, the shooting of well-known kickboxer Michael Marshall.
Tony Mockbell knew that the evidence against him would probably be strong, and that if he went down on those, he would be locked up for a very long time. And that is when he skipped bail.
On March the 19th, 2006, Mockbell fails to turn up for his twice-daily bail check-in at South Melbourne Police Station, immediately forfeiting his $1 million bail.
Everybody wondered for months and months and months if he'd gone overseas. It became sort of a criminal Where's Wally? The reality is that he went up to Bonnie Doon, which is in the central part of northeast Victoria. It's famous as the place that was featured in the film The Castle.
And Mockbell would feel its serenity for the next 8 months, hiding away in a house on Lake Eildon, hatching the most audacious plan to escape Australia once and for all. After the break, you won't believe the extremes Mockbell goes to as he makes his bolt for freedom.
They built a special hidden cavity inside this yacht so that one man of Tony's size could just squeeze in it. It became sort of a criminal Where's Wally?
It's late 2006, and drug lord Tony Mockbell has skipped bail on drug charges and is hiding out in country Victoria. The police have no idea where he is, and he's hatching the most outrageous plan to escape from Australia.
What he's done behind the scenes is arrange for an old friend of his to buy a yacht, and they built a special hidden cavity inside this yacht so that one man of Tony's size could just squeeze in it.
The plan was simple but audacious. The yacht would be taken to northern Western Australia and Mockbell would meet it there. He'd then stow away in the tiny claustrophobic compartment and travel to Greece.
And so he had to stay below deck for days and days and days, enduring seasickness, and they were able to sail to Greece.
Mockbell would spend the next 6 months living the good life in Greece and was even joined by his pregnant girlfriend. But his luck would eventually run out when a disgruntled member of his inner circle turned informer.
He went to a computer that he knew had vital information about Tony's whereabouts and downloaded this information. And he was able to hand that to the police, who then had knowledge of where Mockbell was.
Wearing a wig and having lost weight, Tony Mockbell was arrested by Greek police at a seaside cafe. He'd adopted a new identity.
What now follows is a long, drawn-out battle with the Greek authorities to get Mockbell extradited to Australia, which eventually happens nearly 12 months later.
After 21 hours in the air and 26 months trying to escape the law in Victoria, Tony Mockbell is finally back.
After the extradition from Greece, he goes to jail for a very big whack on major drug charges.
When Mockbell goes into Barwon prison, his significant wealth and criminal standing give him power and influence.
Once it got out how important he was on the outside, the crooks treated him like gods. You never had an argument with him because he didn't talk to you. If he needed something, he would get one of his lackeys to come and see you and get whatever he wanted that way.
One thing Mockbell loves to do in Barwon is cook.
I introduced the cooking program. Every fortnight they gave me a menu with a budget, and staff would go out and collect the ingredients. Tony made a lot of rissoles, but they also utilised salmon steaks because you don't get that on the prison menu.
As authorities seize Mockbell's millions and his money dwindles, so does his influence behind bars.
He's not the guy who can buy around-the-clock protection.
A bloody showdown in Victoria's most secure prison. Tony Mockbell lies bleeding on the exercise yard as paramedics fight to save his life.
Mockbell has been stabbed 7 times by 2 members of a prison gang. He has a fractured skull and a brain hemorrhage.
Tony Mockbell, the untouchable Mr. Big, was now a scarred and battered and frightened man, eking out time in jail.
Victorian underworld figure Tony Mockbell has been rushed from a maximum security prison to a hospital overnight. It's the latest health issue for the drug lord.
Today, Mockbell's health is in terrible decline. He suffered several heart attacks behind bars.
He'll either die in jail from natural causes or from being murdered, or he'll come out of jail an old, frail guy with a lot of memories, most of them bad.
There's a whole mixed bag of gangs in prison, and they're all bloody dangerous.
The rise of organised gangs in Australia's prisons has skyrocketed in the last decade.
And that's as a result of the drug trade.
Controlling the flow of those drugs is significant. The more contemporary criminals are actually flying in by drone. Get a drone drop over the prison. It's pretty clever.
7 News has obtained a log of drone breaches and sightings detailing 26 incidents at 11 Queensland jails in 2 years.
Why gangs appeal to them is everyone's looking for validation, a sense of belonging. You get your validation in the gang because the gang's going, you're all right. You're part of us. You're part of the brotherhood.
Gangs are often formed along cultural and racial lines. In one particular prison in New South Wales, these divisions got particularly bad.
Goulburn's the first prison in Australia to racially segregate inmates.
It took 7 or 8 to be killed before they brought in segregation. They put the Aboriginals in one yard, they put the Muslims in another yard.
They'll have an Asian yard, then they've got a Middle Eastern yard with all the Middle Eastern boys in there, and then basically a white fella's yard, so that you don't interact.
In the dock being sentenced, 2 men who stabbed drug lord Tony Mockbell behind bars to impress a prison gang.
Even Tony Mockbell fell foul of this growing gang menace inside prison. That gang is called GFAM, comprising mostly of men from Maori and Islander backgrounds that inmates want to join. But the judge in this case threw the book at them.
Let me tell you, gentlemen, in a few years, GFAM and the bros are not going to do it for you. You may think you're heroes within the jail, but do you think in 20 years' time that's going to matter?
I don't see any great purpose in those people in life. I pity the poor bloody corrective service officers they've got to spend time with.
Next.
I have committed terrorist acts in Australia.
The radical who killed her lover's wife.
Amira Drutas stabbed her 18 times. It is vile, absolutely vile.
This is the face of Australia's most dangerous terrorist.
Man Monis will be forever known as the Lint Siege gunman. The most notorious terrorist on Australian soil. He took 17 people hostage, had 2 people killed, and died himself in a hail of bullets.
But this story of murder wasn't actually carried out by Monis, but by the woman filming him here, his girlfriend, Amira Drutas. In 2013, Drutas stabbed this woman, Helen Lee, to death before dousing her in petrol and setting her alight. Helen Lee was the wife of man Monis. Drutas would be found guilty of Helen Lee's murder 4 years later, and is today serving a 35-year sentence here at Dilwinia Correctional Centre, 60 kilometres northwest of Sydney. The prison holds just over 530 inmates, the largest female prison in Australia.
I came across Amira while she was in the mental health unit. I didn't like her.
This is Nicole Jess, a correctional officer who's looked after Drutas.
She was just the average mental health inmate that could cause a lot of problems one day and then be okay the next day. Just a real nasty person.
While Drutas's life inside Dilwinia is robbed of all the freedoms she enjoyed on the outside, she is today living in a state-of-the-art prison that recently underwent a $148 million upgrade. The emphasis here is on rehabilitation. Her cell has been designed to provide good natural light and a quiet atmosphere to promote sleep and well-being. Drutas also has access to kitchens and recreational spaces that have been specifically designed to help inmates better socialise. But like all prisoners, Drutas is still locked up for 17 hours a day. But to understand how Drutas ended up committing murder, we need to go back to 2006, when Amira Drutas went by another name.
She wasn't Amira back then, she was Anastasia, had a Greek Orthodox upbringing. Amira Drutas was introduced to man Monis by her own mother, and they started to form a relationship. Now, at this point, Drutas is what the police call a clean skin. He didn't even have a parking ticket.
But all this changes the further she falls in love with Monis.
It didn't take long for her to be totally consumed by him. She converted to Islam in 2008 and started to spout all of those hate-filled messages that man Monis became infamous for.
I have committed terrorist acts in Australia.
This is just one of the many hateful videos that Drudas would record with Monis. She would also take part in sick acts that would later result in her falling foul of the law.
This pen is my gun.
They started writing letters to the families of fallen Australian soldiers in Afghanistan saying that nobody was proud of these Australian soldiers, that they deserved it.
There is nothing wrong in my letters.
It is completely disgusting.
Monis has 2 sons with his wife, Helen Lee. He also had several other women on the go at the same time.
He was a womanizer. She was just one of a few.
Monis's marriage is on the rocks, and Helen leaves him in 2011. Monis decides the only way he can have his children to himself is to kill his wife. Monis now sets about creating what he sees as his new idyllic family, with Drudas as the mother. He rents an apartment in Western Sydney to use for his child access visits. He would arrive with Drudas in tow, but there were very clear instructions.
At man Monis's behest, they would even call her Mummy.
Throughout the end of 2012, Monis and Drudas's desire to kill his wife, Helen Lee, grows. Brazenly, Monis first tries to have her killed by a bikie gang.
He approached the rebels' bikies and said, "I want to kill my wife." They dismissed him out of hand, and then man Monis has decided, it's all right, I can manipulate people. I can get my girlfriend to do it.
Such is Monis's hold over the brainwashed Drudas that she now agrees to commit murder for her lover.
A master manipulator, he was not going to go to jail for murder.
On Sunday, April the 21st, 2013, Helen Lee arrives at the Werrington unit to pick up her kids after they've spent the weekend with their dad.
Helen Lee has pressed on the intercom outside the apartment building.
Unbeknown to Helen, neither her kids nor their father are at the unit. Instead, lying in wait in the 3rd-floor apartment is Amira Drudas. She's wearing a hijab, has a knife, and a container full of petrol.
There were several flights of stairs up to the 3rd floor. Now, she was in between the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor when Amira Drudas met her. And Amira Drudas stabbed her 18 times. She did it in front of somebody looking through a peephole who begged her to stop. Amira Drudas yelled at him, saying, "Get back inside."
Helen Lee has been savagely attacked and is fighting for her life. After the break, you won't believe what Drudas does next. It's Sunday the 21st of April 2013. Amira Drudas has repeatedly stabbed Helen Lee, the wife of her lover, man Monis, who will later become infamous as the Lint Cafe siege killer. But Drudas's vicious attack doesn't stop there.
She poured petrol on her, was begged not to light her on fire by the resident of the apartment building, and she did it anyway.
On Sunday, a woman was found stabbed to death in a stairwell at her Werrington unit complex.
She stabbed a woman 18 times, set her on fire, and fled.
From law-abiding citizen to fully fledged murderer in just 6 short years, man Monis's brainwashing of Amira Drudas is complete. And in the mark of a man who has no moral compass, he does everything he can to create his own alibi while the murder is happening.
Man Monis was at the pool with his sons, taking videos, making sure that the clocks were in the background to show what time he was there. He crashed his car outside Penrith Police Station. Minor bingle, no injuries, but demanding to go to the hospital.
Police then filmed Monis in his hospital bed as he's told his wife is dead. His performance for the camera is worthy of an Oscar.
I'm afraid she's passed away. She's died earlier this afternoon.
Maybe someone else. Maybe it's someone else.
I'm afraid not.
That's not possible, such a thing. It's someone else.
Why do you say that?
His efforts to try and create alibis for himself were so amateur, so clumsy, they were just simply contrived.
Amateurish and contrived they may be, but Monis and Drudas remain free for the next 7 months.
Drudas, Monis's then-girlfriend, was charged with murder. Monis with being an accessory before and after the fact.
Man Monis wasn't arrested for murder. He was only an accessory. She was done for it. She was arrested for the murder. Each of them, despite the gravity of the offence, despite the fact that it was a murder charge, they were given bail. How is it that you have an unhinged woman who's now graduated to murder on her lover's behalf be released out into the community? Apparently, that was safe to do so.
The community isn't safe. Exactly a year later, on December the 15th, 2014, with Man Monis still on bail, he walked into the Lint Cafe, where 2 innocent people lose their lives.
One startling thing to come out of the Lint Siege inquest is that nobody saw it coming. In retrospect, you look at who these people are, what they did, the lack of morality, spiralling into worse and worse crimes, yet every step of the way, each of them was given bail.
Drudas's bail is finally revoked, a week after the Lint Siege, and she's eventually found guilty of Helen Lee's murder in November 2016.
Justice Peter Johnson referred to court papers that showed Amira Drudas had a life expectancy of 48 years. She may not have been given a life sentence, but 44 years was close, and investigating police were delighted.
A family killer, a notorious drug dealer, and a brainwashed murderer. All of them are serving their long sentences in some of the country's toughest prisons. But despite the passage of time, Seth Gonzalez shows no remorse for his crimes.
He's continuing to write about his innocence. He's trying to get the sentence reviewed. Tried at one stage recently for a pardon.
Without his millions to protect himself inside Barwon Prison, former drug lord Tony Mockbell is today a shadow of the gangster he once was.
Over time, his enemies inside the system were able to reach out and cause him some damage.
Amira Drudas has been in prison for 7 years. She continues to cling to her radical views on the inside.
She remained a Muslim in jail. This is a woman who put a knife into another woman 18 times, killed her, and set her alight. It is very hard to think that there's any redemption from that.
Seth Gonzalez, Tony Mockbell, and Amira Drudas are undoubtedly 3 of Australia's most dangerous prisoners. Justice has been served. In Australia, over 40,000 men and women are currently behind bars. They've shattered countless lives, destroyed families. Some have been responsible for unspeakable violence.
There are just some people that are just evil of heart.
She's just scary. She's just real scary.
Some people are born with just that evil gene.
If you think you've seen and heard it all, you haven't. The truth of life behind bars in some of Australia's highest security prisons, told by the people who know.
It's dangerous on a daily basis. It's life-threatening.
Stabbings, hangings, people getting their heads stomped on.
If I was dangerous when I went in, I was more dangerous when I came out.
My broken life, a shadow of my past. My time is not enough.
In this episode, we reveal what a notorious murderer has to say for his crimes.
He was convincing other prisoners and staff that he was innocent of the crime. It was like he was almost convincing himself.
Plus, the lengths prisoners will go to smuggle in phones.
There was a phone up his bum that started ringing.
You could actually see whose vagina was ringing. And I was like, oh, God, you know, she didn't think to take the battery out or turn it off.
And the moment a jealous and violent man killed his girlfriend in broad daylight.
You can see the terror in her eyes. 69 seconds after that image is captured, Lisa is dead.
You might think this woman looks like the most ordinary person in the world. But what Catherine Knight did to her partner is almost beyond belief. A crime so horrendous, she became the first woman in Australia deemed too dangerous to ever be released from prison.
It's not a murder that happens, like, in an angry moment. It's not a single act of revenge. She beheads him. She beheads him with such skill it's remarked upon by the forensic pathologist. She spent hours with his corpse, defiling it, rearranging it, beheading him like they behead animals in an abattoir.
Catherine Knight now calls Dilwinnia Correctional Centre home. It's Australia's largest women's prison, but of the 500 or so women detained here, none have committed anything on par with what she did. Yet inside jail, she's found a tranquility she's never known.
I reckon inside the head of Catherine Knight right now, she'd be super relaxed because she's got a routine. She's completely at peace with what she's done. And in her head, she's justified in her action. So it's an easy coping mechanism. If I've done something, but I have a reason for I've done it, I can live with it.
You'd never guess the woman standing behind Cardinal George Pell is one of Australia's most notorious murderers. Kat Armstrong, a former inmate, says she's just as friendly as she looks.
The strongest memory I have of Kath Knight was her gentle and sociable demeanour. I couldn't believe it because the woman that I spoke to and got to know was not the woman that was portrayed on the media. She looked like, to me, a young grandmother.
Even at her trial, journalist Peter Lawler was struck by how placid she appeared.
Looked like a librarian, like a school teacher. She just looked like this sweet, middle-aged lady.
But looks can be deceiving, and in the normally tranquil Hunter Valley, Catherine Knight was a feared woman.
She's just real scary. She's just one of those women you avoid. You never park your car near her house. You cross the street if you see her coming.
From a young age, Catherine was surrounded by violence and abuse and had a hair-trigger temper.
It was dystopian. It was dysfunctional. Her mother warned the boyfriends, warned people around her, you watch this one. She's got something in her. She's dangerous. She could change in a moment. A rage over nothing.
While some teenagers dream of marriage or travel, Catherine dreamed of working in an abattoir, and when she was 16, her dream came true.
It's pretty weird, isn't it, to aspire to work at an abattoir? Later, she spoke about how much she enjoyed that actual cutting the animals. It gave her pleasure. I think she said that was the happiest time of her life.
At age 19, she married Dave Kellett, the start of what would be a long cycle of violence.
The honeymoon went as planned as far as Kellett was concerned. He did the honourable thing a couple of times. He says 3 times, and he fell asleep. But then he woke up and she was throttling him. She was furious because apparently her parents had sex 5 times on the wedding night, and that's the prescribed number of times you have to have sex. So she throttled him. Welcome to married life, Dave.
If he was hoping this would be a one-off, Dave would have been disappointed.
This was a violent marriage, and Kellett seems to have been on the receiving end of it. One night he was late home from the darts. Catherine hated it when you were late home. She hit him in the head with a skillet, with a frying pan. She fractured his skull. He collapsed at the neighbours. He was taken to hospital. He was kept in hospital for a few days. The police asked him if he wanted to press charges, and he said no.
But by the time their first child was born, months later, Kellett had finally had enough and left Catherine for another woman.
It triggered a series of episodes that got progressively worse. There's a story that the baby was put on the train tracks and rescued by a local homeless guy. Before the train came, she took an axe down the main street. She threatened to kill people. This is all because David Kellett's left her for another woman.
Perhaps because violence was all Kath knew, her next partner, David Saunders, copped it just as badly.
Poor old Saunders comes home late from the pub one night, opens the door. She hits him in the face with a hot iron. There were burn marks on the side of his face. His workmates started taking bets on which parts of him would be missing in the morning. She stabbed him, and he got one of his friends to sew him up before work. I mean, it was a running joke among his friends. It wasn't much of a joke for Saunders.
Catherine's obsession with violence was no secret. It was on display. She decorated her home with symbols of death.
From very early on, Kath loved pelts. She loved skeletons. She had a morbid fascination with those things. She said it gave her comfort to be surrounded by these things. That maybe, I don't know, things that were dead couldn't challenge her. And she loved her knives. They hung above the marital bed. Can you imagine that?
Despite her violent reputation, Catherine was never single for too long. Her next partner, John Price, was a local miner, a good catch, and things started smoothly.
Well, this is the thing. There are good days with Kath. She's a fun girl. Things weren't exactly peaceful between Kath and Pricey, but they were good enough early on.
Of course, that was never going to last. Catherine was just as violent and volatile. Although John Price tried to leave her, by February 2000, they were back together.
She was very persuasive. When Kath wanted you back, she got you back. She could turn on the charm. Apparently, she was good in bed. I don't want to think about that.
But Catherine was no changed woman. The violence was getting worse. And not long after they were back together, she stabbed him, something she later blamed on her eyesight.
Once Pricey got off the phone, he started on me, and I was around washing up, and it could have been a fork, a spoon, or anything in my hand. It was a knife that cut your meal with, and I aimed it at him, and it got him. He was leaning closer than what I thought. And my eyesight was bad at that time. I've only had new glasses since then.
By late February, John Price was afraid for his life.
He ran into friends around town. They all recall that he was subdued, that he was sad. Pricey knew what was coming. Nothing was going to stop Kath.
Coming up, The twisted crime that made Catherine Knight too dangerous to ever be released from prison.
There was a head in a pot on the stove.
It's something from a horror movie, legitimately. Yeah.
February 29, 2000. The sleepy town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, is about to become the unlikely setting for a horror story. John Price has confided in his colleagues at the coal mine. He's afraid his violent partner, Catherine Knight, will kill him.
He showed them where she'd stabbed him a few days earlier. They were worried about him. They offered him somewhere to stay, but he was worried that if he wasn't home, she'd go for his children.
That evening, Pricey returned home and fell asleep. And sometime later, Catherine showed up and let herself in.
She was planning to have sex with him that night. Planning to have sex with him and then kill him.
But this was no ordinary murder.
She kills him. 37 times she stabbed that man. Started stabbing him in the bed. Stabbed him as he ran down the hallway. Stabbed him as he got outside. Dragged him back inside. And he eventually bled to death.
What Kath did next defies belief. She prepared dinner, meat and potatoes. Except this wasn't animal meat.
She doesn't just cook him, does she? It's a long night. She serves up a meal on a plate. She cooked vegetables. She made gravy. She put out little notes to his children.
When Pricey didn't show up to work at the mine the next morning, his colleagues immediately sounded the alarm. But nothing could have prepared the police for what they saw when they entered Pricey's home.
She hung the skin up on a coat hanger up in there. So when the police were going through, they thought it was a curtain, but it was actually his skin.
There was a head in a pot on the stove.
It's something from a horror movie, legitimately. Yeah.
While the cops will never forget the horror of that day, Catherine Knight pretended to overdose on pills. They found her in the house unconscious. She claimed she couldn't remember what she did.
You recall Pricey being in the bed?
I can't remember anything.
Do you recall yourself going to bed?
Faintly.
She may have committed the worst crime imaginable. But the way former inmate Kat Armstrong describes her life inside prison, Catherine Knight is at peace.
Kath likes to knit, so she was knitting a lot. And sitting down having meals together. Watching TV, mainly Bold and the Beautiful and repeats of Friends and Seinfeld and things like that.
She doesn't just knit and watch TV, she works too. At Dilwinia, she's a sweeper, a role reserved for the best behaved prisoners. It's also the highest paying job. She could be earning up to $90 a week.
Her job in induction was to get the greens ready for the people, ask what size you were. She would also take your clothes. So this is very trusted. I'll give her that. She would clean the bathrooms, clean the cells that people would be staying in.
So some of the trusted roles that we have in a correctional centre is the sweeping role as a sweeper is quite trusted, but you may have other areas where it's an even trusted role. So say, for example, reception. If you're in reception where inmates are coming in, you're dealing with property and stuff like that.
If there was any trust issues or social issues or problems, and if she was not the model prisoner that she was, she would never have got that position.
Everyone who's met Catherine in prison says the same thing. She is very well behaved.
I never had any issues with Catherine. She was a very polite, respectful and compliant inmate.
Super calm, no troubles, and zero problems with her in jail ever. Nicest pie lady.
She sounds like the model prisoner, doesn't she? Very quietly spoken, gets on with everybody, enjoys the order of the place.
That this quiet, content woman is so at odds with the crimes she's committed is not lost on the people who've met her.
I don't believe for a minute Kath Knight is evil at all. Is it horrendous? Is it the most extreme thing that somebody could do to another human being? Absolutely. Absolutely. That wasn't the woman that I knew.
I don't know how long it takes to skin a full-grown man, but she did it. And she did it all the way through to the end. So, as much as she's nice, and she makes little anecdotal little fucking one-liners, she's still, at the heart of it all, a monster to do that, right?
But Catherine hasn't completely lost her sharp edges.
When I met Catherine Knight, she's quite funny. She goes, she's dinner the quickest way to a man's heart, and I'm like, I know, through his stomach. I'm thinking that's like what you get told in a European household. She goes, nah, through his rib cage. And I was like, I had this little laugh. I was like, and then I found out who she was.
Catherine Knight will die inside prison. That sits just fine with all those who've been traumatized by her crimes.
The people involved in this case tell me that they lie awake at night thinking about Catherine, you know. Pricey's daughter used to lock the bedroom window and lock the bedroom door for fear of Catherine. The thought of her getting out at any time terrify a lot of people.
She may be a docile, compliant inmate, but that's far from the norm. Across Australia, prison staff have to contend with dangerous men and women who could become violent at any moment.
The mini riot began around 2 p.m. when a handcuffed prisoner punched a warden, knocking him unconscious.
With more than 40,000 prisoners detained across the country, riots are always a threat, and inmates have killed at least 12 correctional officers in recent years.
It is a very dangerous job. It has its perils.
One night in Sydney's infamous Long Bay jail, Dominic Pisano nearly became another statistic himself.
There was a night shift and myself and 2 other officers were rostered on the landing.
Every night, guards would move prisoners from one section of the jail to the other. Standard procedure. Except on this particular night, the inmates must have sniffed some sort of opportunity. Without warning, they pounced.
Shortly after 9 o'clock last night, 2 prisoners armed with a mallet and wooden blocks forced their way into the warder's office. 3 prison officers were taken hostage and locked in a cell. There they stayed as the 58 remand prisoners in Wing 13 ran riot.
We barricaded ourselves in the cell with cell furniture, and the reason we did that was we didn't want to be separated.
All Pisano and his colleagues could do was wait. They had no way of knowing if help was on the way.
Just been married probably just a year and a half at the time. I wasn't able to contact her for a number of hours. It was a very daunting situation for everyone.
Authorities only had one option: go in with full force.
They stormed the ring, they had to breach the barricade, there was chemical agents, gas used. Eventually they were able to restore order. They were able to rescue us from the cell and we were taken out.
Coming up on Australia's most dangerous prisoners, guards revealed a harrowing toll of interacting with one of the country's worst criminals.
You're talking to the likes of Adrian Bailey, you're just your normal-looking bloke. But that normal-looking bloke is a rapist and a murderer.
Adrian Bailey is a name etched in the minds of Melburnians. The serial rapist brutally murdered Jill Maher, a total stranger, as she walked home from a night out.
Jill fought very hard and it escalated in a way that it hadn't before for Adrian Bailey, and he decided that he didn't want to go back to jail. And he thought this was the way out. He thought that he should kill her, silence her. And so he strangled her.
Bailey's crimes landed him a 40-year sentence in Victoria's notorious Barwon prison. Inside jail, he tries hard to be liked.
I think people would see him as a good bloke, somebody who they wouldn't mind spending time with, somebody who would do things for them and so forth.
He's a compliant prisoner. If you didn't know what he did, you probably wouldn't guess it. He comes across like a normal bloke.
In one way, you would describe him as a model prisoner in that he never causes any trouble. Another way of describing it is that he is a suck. I mean, he tries to sort of volunteer for jobs, unpleasant jobs, and be helpful to screws, tries to get on their good side.
But hiding beneath the facade of this nice bloke is a violent murderer. The story of how Bailey unleashed the monster within starts in 2012. On a buzzing Friday night, 29-year-old Jill Maher was at Knockoff Drinks.
When the nights are cold, don't know where to go. I wish I still had my home.
Jill Maher worked at the ABC. She worked for John Fane, who was very highly respected superstar in Melbourne, and Jill was out having drinks with friends from work, and she was so close to her home. She lived in an inner city suburb of Melbourne in an apartment with her husband.
4 kilometres across town, this man, a dangerous man who preyed on women, was also out drinking and would soon cross paths with Jill.
Of course, when it was time to go home, one of the friends said, I'll walk you home or grab you a cab or something, and she said, don't be crazy, I'm just like 5 minutes away. And so she tottered off down the street, minutes from home, husband waiting for her.
She should have walked through the door moments later, but Jill never made it. Her husband, Tom, was worried sick. Cops scoured the streets, turning up her handbag. All they could say with any certainty was it didn't look like Jill had run off somewhere.
Tom, what are you going through?
Hell. It's just devastating, but just trying to push on as much as possible.
A few days after Jill went missing, police uncovered this vision that gave them a vital clue and still makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
That chilling footage will never leave me. This very clear footage of Jill walking past and then a man running after her.
The police didn't know it yet, but the man in the video was Adrian Bailey. He had a lengthy rap sheet, more than 20 counts of sexual assault. He was on parole for raping 5 women. He should have been in prison. Instead, he was out drinking.
Adrian Bailey was having some kind of outing with his partner at the same time in the city, and they had an argument. The partner apparently walked out, left him to it. He kept drinking. He was quite drunk by the time he left and headed home. The taxi driver was worried that he might even vomit in the car, so he kind of kicked him out along Sydney Road.
So that's how this serial rapist came to be prowling the streets just as Jill was walking home. The moment they crossed paths was caught on camera.
He sort of called out to her as if to ask her a question. And she turned around politely and answered him. He was asking for directions or something.
Their interaction lasted for mere seconds. Just moments later, Jill was fighting for her life.
He kissed her. He tried to kiss her and grab at her. And Jill was incensed and she slapped him. She slapped his face. And at that stage, he became enraged and he sexually assaulted her on the bonnet of a car in that street. So Bailey murdered Jill Maher in that street, and then he carried her body into a small, very dark alleyway close by.
Bailey returned home to grab his car before driving to the outskirts of the city and dumping her in a shallow grave. But luckily for police, he was no criminal mastermind. Cops tracked Jill's phone as her body was driven out of the city. And when they combed through tolling data, they spotted Bailey's car.
It turned out to be one of the first cases in Australia where phone tower technology really played a part in solving a crime.
Police searched Bailey's home, and they found the smoking gun, Jill's SIM card.
Desperate to avoid the cameras, Adrian Bailey is brought into Melbourne's police headquarters. Investigators believe he's the man in the blue hoodie.
Bailey admitted he was the man in the video chasing after Jill. He confessed to raping and murdering her and led police to her grave.
Justice has now been done.
Bailey sentenced to life with a non-parole period of 35 years.
Coming up on Australia's Most Dangerous Prisoners, we'll reveal for the first time Adrian Bailey's sickening version of events.
At the time, it was a believable story. And you ask yourself, fuck, you know, is it possible?
When serial sex offender Adrian Bailey brutally raped and murdered Jill Marr as she was walking home, the country erupted in anger and grief. What made it sting even more was that he should never have been free to prowl the streets. He was on parole for raping another 5 women. Jill's murder prompted a bail crackdown, and that means that inside prison, Bailey has to watch his back.
Adrian Bailey is one of the most hated men in the prison system because no one could get parole after that. The government clamped down. They were never going to win any votes if they didn't.
In fact, he's so loathed that he has to be kept in Barwon's Hoyer Wing, a separate unit for prisoners at risk of being attacked.
Because of the notoriety of the Jill Marr case, he's in the boneyard, which is the protected area of the prison. He's in with other sex offenders or people who need to be in there for their own protection.
Inside prison, Bailey will tell anyone who'll listen his own twisted version of events.
A lot of the protection prisoners try and make up a bullshit reason for them being in protection. Oh, this isn't my fault, I didn't do this. Adrian Bailey was just a grub. You could see it.
But listening to those stories can mess with your head. Former corrections officer Ash Langsworth has never spoken before about the interaction with Bailey that still haunts him.
I was his caseworker and I had a fairly good rapport with Adrian. Conversed with staff on a regular basis. He was joking at times and respectful towards staff. He told me that he had a relationship with Jill. And they had been in a relationship for a few months, and he told me that he planned to head over to WA with Jill. And he met up with Jill the night in question, and he told me that she decided not to go. And then he struck her in the throat with a clenched fist. And then raped and killed her. At the time, it was a believable story. And you build up this rapport with a prisoner and you ask yourself, fuck, you know, is it possible? But then you get back to reality and you know it's not the truth.
It wasn't true. It was a disgraceful lie, and one that forensic psychologist James Ogloff was never going to fall for.
He came across as very polite, very engaging, but also very superficial. So I didn't see the real Adrian Bailey. And he said something to the effect that, well, I'm not going to say things that you want me to say just because you want to hear from them. I'm not going to lie. And I said, I think you just have. And so I sort of ended things there.
But the second time Ogloff assessed him, the mask slipped, and he finally told the truth.
he literally burst out crying. And he said words to the effect, that he can't control himself. When he was sexually frustrated, sexually aroused, that, the sort of monster came out within him.
Kept safely away from other prisoners, Bailey's life inside jail is one of order and routine. He has a job and a new religion to keep him occupied.
He converted to Buddhism. He had a Buddhist come in once a month, and that gave him an outlet, I suppose.
Bailey will have plenty of time to dedicate himself to Buddhism. He'll be in his late 80s before he's eligible for parole.
He will definitely apply for parole at the first chance he gets. I assume the community will rise up as one to oppose that, and I assume that he will not understand why, and that he will then apply every chance he gets after that and assume that he should receive parole. He's that kind of character who can convince himself of his own reality.
Coming up, the cold-blooded killer who murdered his girlfriend in a fit of rage.
Simon Gattani was somebody who was incredibly controlling, incredibly angry, incredibly possessive of his partner.
Sydney, July 2011. And this is the last chilling image of former dancer Lisa Harnham. And the man covering her face is her fiancé, Simon Gattani.
You can see the terror in her eyes. It's a blurry CCTV image, but you can see the fear and the urgency that is in her eyes at that moment. 69 seconds after that image is captured, Lisa is dead.
Simon Gattani had a deadly temper, consumed by rage, killing his new fiancée in a high-rise apartment building in the heart of Sydney.
A man's faced court accused of throwing his fiancée to her death from the balcony of their 15th floor apartment last Saturday.
Simon maintained his innocence from the day he was charged until the day he was convicted. But he was charged with murder within a matter of days of Lisa's death.
Bordered by bushland, 150 kilometres northwest of Sydney, Lithgow Correctional Centre is where you'll find Gattani these days. This maximum security jail is home to 360 inmates. Amongst them are some of the state's worst murderers, rapists and gangsters.
He's received work as a sort of sweeper in prison where he's doing cleaning. I mean, there's not a lot that people can do in prison.
Gattani is now a prison cleaner, far from his life as a corporate high flyer. Before that brutal brain snap in 2011, Gattani enjoyed splashing his money around town.
He lived an incredibly flashy, extravagant lifestyle, and there was a lot of evidence in the trial about that lifestyle, the rent on his apartment. He spent a lot of money on clothes. He took particular care of his appearance, and that included designer outfits. He was very interested and almost obsessed by physical fitness.
Around 12 months before the murder, former dancer Lisa Harnham had travelled from Canada to Australia in search of new adventures.
And that's how I play golf. Thank you for watching.
But when she was looking for somewhere to stay, she made a fatal decision.
Lisa and Simon first met when they became flatmates. It did develop sort of very quickly into a very serious relationship.
This home video captures a happy couple in love, but Gattani was not the man he appeared to be. He had a history of petty crime. In one run-in with police, he bit off part of the ear of a detective.
Simon Gattani was incredibly controlling, incredibly angry, incredibly possessive of his partner.
Gattani began to show his true colours and started to control every aspect of Lisa's life. He told her what to wear, who to see, and where to go. He was so obsessed, he installed CCTV cameras in their apartment.
it was very difficult for her to come and go from the apartment. Indeed, she didn't come and go from the apartment. At a point, she was really only leaving to get groceries. She wasn't working, she wasn't seeing friends and family.
In December 2010, Gattani sent this text to his girlfriend: "Please don't let any guy talk to you today, and please don't look at any guy, because your eyes should only gaze on me, the one." He denied Lisa needed permission to leave their unit, but once sent a text saying, "Who the f*** do you think you are, walking around the house like you own it, or coming and going without my permission?"
Gattani's jealousy was out of control, but the couple seemed stronger than ever. At her 30th birthday celebration, Lisa accepted his proposal of marriage.
They had an incredibly public proposal. It was being filmed, got down on one knee, made a speech, and including in the speech, quite, I think, chillingly, there are comments in there where he talks about, like, finding someone who would serve him.
But serving Gattani was becoming increasingly claustrophobic and frightening for Lisa. Trapped in his ivory tower and isolated from most of her friends and family, she began planning her escape.
How do you engineer leaving a relationship like that with someone who you know is prone to that kind of fury and rage?
Terrified of what might happen next, Lisa packed her bags and booked a flight home to Canada. But Gattani was a step ahead. He had installed software on her phone to access her messages. He knew she was planning to leave him.
In the early hours of the morning that Lisa died, she had discovered the software, and we know that because she had changed the password to the software, and she changed the password on it to the word trust.
As Lisa tried to run for her life, Gattani's rage boiled over. This confronting moment was caught on the only camera that he hadn't disconnected.
That image shows just how much danger someone is in when they are trying to leave a relationship, like a relationship that Simon and Lisa had, a relationship that was completely defined by controlling behaviour.
34 seconds after callously throwing the woman he professed to love 15 stories to her death, Gattani was captured in a state of panic on CCTV cameras.
He's not bereft, he's angry.
2 years later, when the murder trial began, Gattani had well and truly moved on, regularly turning up at the court with a glamorous new partner, 24-year-old Rachel Louise.
What's happening with the signs, guys? Can you explain it?
You can read them, that's the point of them.
Rachel and Simon's family were all completely adamant and never wavering in their belief that Simon had done nothing wrong and that it was a complete miscarriage of justice that he had been charged with Lisa's murder.
Gattani claims she fell from the balcony, despite his efforts to save her. But the testimony of one eyewitness, Joshua Rathmel, was critical in the trial.
To my perception, without a shirt on, carrying what I thought at the time was a black suitcase or general luggage on several items, and it looked to me as though he was unloading them, throwing them off.
Josh's evidence was so pivotal because that supported the idea that it had been a man holding an object.
It was someone holding the black object and unloading it.
She must have been rendered unconscious for the fact that her body in Simon's arms was so still and not moving at all.
But Lisa had one final message from beyond the grave.
There was a torn-up piece of paper found in Lisa's clothes which said there are cameras inside and outside the house. She did not want him to get away with it.
Gattani's committal hearing was told a woman's screams were heard coming from their apartment the morning Ms. Harnham died. The neighbour heard yelling and a female voice screaming out, "God help me, help me."
How fitting that one of the key pieces of evidence was a surveillance video.
His girlfriend yelled, you're wrong," and had to be restrained by friends. She then rushed outside for a cigarette.
Does anyone have a lighter?
One was found, smoking, surrounded by media.
What's going through your head right now, Rachel?
The relationship between Rachel and Simon ended not all that long after the trial.
Cold-blooded killer Simon Gattani was sentenced to a 26-year jail term with an 18-year non-parole period. Being a high-profile prisoner, he's in the protective wing at Lithgow. If he behaves, he'll be out on parole in 2031. Coming up, on Australia's most dangerous prisoners, we reveal how prisoners smuggle phones into jail.
There was a line of about 15 of us, and then all of a sudden this mobile phone starts ringing. Within a short space of time, you could actually see whose vagina was ringing.
Inside Aussie prisons, criminals aren't the only ones authorities have to watch out for. Although corruption is extremely rare, it does happen.
Now, most correction services officers are obviously very, very diligent, honest and hard-working, but there are some there that will succumb, obviously, when there's enormous amounts of money waved in front of you, or retribution to something you've done, or something like that.
I believe there's a level of people letting it happen. Obviously, that's why officers have lost their jobs, because they've been caught.
One of the most popular items of contraband are mobile phones. They're banned in prison and are precious for criminals.
Every time we brought in a mobile phone, which was like burner phones, they call them, it's not a lingo, $500 a phone. Next day, you got cell phones ringing off in the cell. No one knows how they got there, because in maximum, when I work visits, we'd strip the inmates, we'd say bend over, literally open your legs, and you'd cough. There's no way you're putting a fucking iPhone up your ass.
Well, I would leave that to your imagination, but inmates, you know the size of mobile phones today, and inmates have ingenious ways of hiding these things.
Former prisoner Kerry Tucker has seen some of the ways women conceal their phones.
I remember some new person had brought in a mobile phone, and they'd banked it, inserted it vaginally, and they had it in Glad wrap and whatever else. And I remember we're in the leisure centre, we're all standing up, there's a line of about 15 of us, and then all of a sudden this mobile phone starts ringing. Within a short space of time, you could actually see whose vagina was ringing. And I was like, oh God, she didn't think to take the battery out or turn it off.
If prisoners aren't smuggling their phones in, they have to rely on public phones and can only use them at set times. For former prisoner Taylor Budden, that meant chancing violence.
An incident happened where one of the girls jumped the phone queue on me when I was standing there for ages. And for me, the phone was very important. It was my only connection to the outside and my partner at the time. And I waited, and I was about to go on, and it got snatched from me. And I said to her, you have to wait, you can't do that. And then she sort of went to punch on with me. And as soon as I went to, hit her back, I was the one that got dragged away. I was then segregated and put into an isolation cell in just a hospital gown and a pair of undies and a bra with no TV, nothing. And that's where I stood for 12 days.
Prisons are tough places. They can be hard to survive, even if you're a dangerous criminal. But murderer Kath Knight seems to enjoy it.
Joy, her twin sister, visited her, and she said, "I'm happy here." It's bizarre. She'd left that dangerous world behind. She told Joy not to visit her anymore. She didn't really need visitors.
Serial rapist and murderer Adrian Bailey lies to everyone, and himself.
He really does believe that he can live in the outside world with the rest of us, that he should live with us, that he should be given every opportunity to do so, and that he's been highly misunderstood.
Simon Gattani, who murdered his fiancée Lisa Harnham, still has many years behind bars to contemplate his horrific crime. But he appears to be making the best of his time inside.
Simon is an incredibly rigid, disciplined person. There was someone, he had a very extreme devotion to fitness. He also had been very committed to his faith, and he had spent time as a young person in a monastery overseas. I don't think they can compare to what it's like being in jail, but there's perhaps certain elements of Simon's character that he's had to lean on in the years that he's spent in prison. There are still possibilities for Simon, even once he's out of jail, even though he'll be sort of in his 60s. Lisa is forever 30.
Some are still delusional. Some are just getting on with their lives inside. But for all of them, justice has been served.